Welcome once more to Newcastle Family History Society podcast. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In the series What Are You Looking At?, Jane Ison is discussing the availability of government records for boys and girls sent to the industrial schools and reformatories in New South Wales during the mid to late 1800s. In this fifth episode in the series, Jane will speak about how she was able to identify many of the girls sent to the reformatories at Newcastle, Biloela and Shaftesbury before August 1888. She will also discuss the only Shaftesbury reformatory records, beginning in 1888, that have survived. For further information about the differences between industrial schools and reformatories, listen to episode 4 of the Bad Girls series, An Angel in Trouble, where Jane recounted the adventures of the notorious Newcastle reformatory admission, Mary Ann Meehan.
Every government reformatory established in New South Wales before 1900 was under the supervision and care of Agnes King. King was the Newcastle Industrial School matron superintendent, but in January 1869 she established the first reformatory in Newcastle, in the building beside the industrial school. Both institutions were placed under the control of the new Newcastle superintendent, Joseph Hines Clark. In May 1871, both the industrial school and the reformatory moved to Cockatoo Island in Sydney Harbour, where they were rebranded as Biloela. The industrial school was housed in the old Cockatoo Island jail buildings, and the Biloela reformatory was again housed in separate premises near the industrial school. The Sydney Morning Herald on the 10th of March 1879 identified its exact location.
The reformatory is established in one of the stone houses occupied by a warder in the old convict days. There are at present only 2 girls in this department, so that the labours of Mrs. King the matron are just at present rather light.
It has always been that while the industrial school was crowded to overflowing, in the nearby reformatory King cared for a very small number of female offenders. There were only 5 girls ever admitted to the Newcastle Reformatory, and only 4 transferred to the Biloela Reformatory. The neighbouring Newcastle Industrial School admitted 187 girls in total, and transferred 104 of them to Cockatoo Island. Newspaper reports stated that in September 1875 there were 9 reformatory girls, and by December 1876 there were 14 inmates, but by October 1879 only 2 remained, as the rest had completed their sentences. After the 1873 Royal Commission, where it was recommended that the reformatory and the industrial school be removed from Cockatoo Island and separately located, it still took years before that move actually occurred. So, on 5th of February 1880, the Biloela Reformatory and its inmates, still controlled by Agnes King, were moved to the Shaftesbury Reformatory for females at Watson's Bay. The cottage-style premises at Shaftesbury were intended to house between 40 and 50 girls. 13 were in residence in 1900, when the State Children's Relief Board took control. On the 12th of April 1904, Shaftesbury ceased to be a reformatory, and in 1905 any remaining girls under sentence were transferred to Ormond House in Paddington, which was then proclaimed as a reformatory school. It wasn't until 1887 that the Biloela Industrial School was finally moved from Cockatoo Island to Parramatta. An industrial school was not a reformatory. It is clear from newspaper reports written at the time that many magistrates didn't understand the difference and often didn't correctly identify where any child appearing before them under either the Industrial Schools Act or the Reformatory Act was to be sent. If a magistrate made errors in his sentencing, and yes, magistrates were all men, then the general public had no hope of achieving any kind of understanding. Newspaper articles consistently referred to the industrial schools at Newcastle and Biloela as reformatories. At this time, there was no reformatory for boys, but magistrates and reporters consistently referred to the boys' industrial school ship, the Vernon, as a reformatory. Even now, the State Archives website does not distinguish clearly enough between the two Newcastle girls' institutions. Reformatories in New South Wales were and remain very badly understood. I discussed the differences between the two girls' institutions in the Bad Girls series. In general, arrests under the Industrial School Act were made because of an association with thieves or prostitutes where a child had committed no other crime. Children were to remain in an industrial school for 12 months, and after that time they were usually apprenticed. To be admitted to a reformatory, a girl had to have committed a crime, frequently a larceny or false pretences, that for anyone else would have resulted in a jail sentence of 12 months or more. When admitted to a reformatory, girls were sentenced for a specific period of at least a year or more. Of course, there were exceptions, and some children who had committed a crime were sent to the Newcastle Industrial School because before 1869 there was no reformatory. Listeners need to be aware that during the 1880s there were also a number of private and church-run institutions created to cater for the growing number of destitute children and young criminals. This podcast only discusses the government records that are now available. Any admissions to non-government institutions will not be listed in any records held by state archives, with the exception of the very early Catholic and Protestant orphan school records. At this time, for example, the Catholic Church ran not only the benevolent asylums, but also operated a reformatory at Manly. To learn more about these many other institutions, search online for the Australian government website Find and Connect. This site lists every known Australian children's institution, both government-run and privately operated, and identifies where any surviving records may be accessed. There is a link to my website from Find and Connect. I have explained in previous podcasts in this series how, by using a variety of supplementary sources, I have managed to recover the names of girls admitted to the industrial schools where that name did not survive in the original register. Unfortunately, as with the boys admitted to the Vernon, finding the reformatory admissions is not easily done. Researchers will find that usually Trove, the New South Wales Police Gazette, or jail in-transit records will identify girls sent to the reformatories, but family stories will be a less reliable guide because of the confusion, both then and now, between what constituted an industrial school admission and what was a reformatory admission. For any reformatory girl admitted before August 1888, a researcher will need to think about the record being viewed and the arrest circumstances in order to best decide where your ancestor may have been sent. If newspapers reported that a child was sent to the reformatory but the girl did not commit a crime, ensure that you check whether she is recorded in the records for the industrial school that I discussed in podcasts 1 and 2 of this series. You may also need to visit my website, nis.wikidot.com, to check the names of any children that I have identified where their records did not survive. I stress that listeners should understand that girls admitted to the Newcastle Reformatory, the Biloela Reformatory, or the Shaftesbury Reformatory before September 1888 do not appear in any records for an industrial school unless the girl was admitted to both institutions, and that was a rare event. No entrance book or discharge register for a reformatory from this time period was ever received by State Archives, although it is certain that such a document did once exist. So what reformatory records do remain? Only one admission register remains for Shaftesbury, so if you have a name and an admission date from after August 1888, then you will have access to the admission and discharge details that remain in that surviving register. The original register, NRS 2438, is stored at State Archives in Kingswood. It has been filmed and may be accessed on microfilm reel 3850. These original records are available to view and to download on Ancestry. Names of Shaftesbury admissions can be easily found online by searching the Child Welfare Index, accessed on the Museums of History website. Inserting the word reformatory in the search box will result in a complete list of the reformatory girls. Being aware that both the Child Care Index and Ancestry store the reformatory names and records with the industrial school admissions will hopefully avoid misunderstandings about why a child was arrested. Remember again that as a researcher you need to think about what you are viewing and check and recheck if something you uncover doesn't fit. The Shaftesbury Register is arranged alphabetically, beginning with the letter A, with double pages for each letter of the alphabet. The first girl admitted to the Shaftesbury Reformatory was Josephine Johnston in September 1888, and her name appears under the letter J. Generally, an admission's name and often a birth date or parents are identified. The girl's offence, the length of her sentence, the date and court where she was tried, and how she was eventually discharged are recorded. Reading the Shaftesbury Register shows that Rose Arundel, who appears on the very first page, should not have been sent to Shaftesbury. Her crime was consorting with prostitutes, and she was tried in Hillgrove near Armidale on the 14th of January 1895. It took 6 months before she was moved from Shaftesbury to the cottage home. More information held at State Archives would probably allow researchers to track what happened to Rose after the 12th of June 1895. In 1870, Ellen Youngman had committed a crime and was wrongly sent to the Newcastle Industrial School. She came with the wrong paperwork. Joseph Hines Clark, in a letter to the Stony Creek magistrate who had sentenced Ellen, patiently but very officially explained that a mistake had been made. Clark said,
I would suggest that a fresh warrant be forwarded to me, committing the girl to the reformatory, and I shall thank you to have the enclosed record of her case filled in and returned at your earliest convenience. I shall return the warrant I hold when I receive the other.
Oops! I will take a more in-depth look at Clark's letters in the next podcast in this series. I would not be at all surprised to find that there were many other girls who were supposed to have been sent to an industrial school but ended up in one of the reformatories instead, or vice versa. But what if you find a possible reformatory admission from before August 1888? One of the most rewarding letters stored in the Colonial Secretary's correspondence received 1826 to 1896, which was the subject of podcast 4 in this series, was letter number 74/5050. This letter named the reformatory girls admitted to the Newcastle and Billawheeler reformatories between January 1869 and before August 1874. The request regarding the length of sentence of all the reformatory inmates had been made by the members of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, and the information was provided by the relieving superintendent John Ledger Dale on 31st of August 1874. The details of the letter must have been copied from a register that has not survived. Dale confirmed that Newcastle Reformatory had received 5 admissions, and a further 15 girls had been sent to the Billawheeler Reformatory by that date. Most had been charged with stealing and had received sentences of between 1 and 3 years. The letter is very detailed and identifies who the girls were, where they were arrested and tried, and when they were discharged. I have named these first 20 girls on my website for the use of family researchers. By using newspaper reports in trove, jail in transit records, or entries in the New South Wales Police Gazette, I have identified Billawheeler reformatory girls from between September 1874 and January 1880, and Shaftesbury reformatory admissions from between February 1880 and August 1888. Once a potential reformatory girl has been identified, I cross-check her name and age with the known Billawheeler admissions. If the girl is not in the industrial school records and is not very young, then she was very probably a reformatory admission. The only complication in identifying a reformatory admission occurs when the industrial school record that you need to cross-check against has not survived, but this is fortunately a surprisingly short 2-year period between September 1874 and about September 1876. And I have listed almost all the missing industrial school admissions. Look under the Billawheeler tab on my website to see many missing reformatory names. Sadly, we do not know how many girls were ever admitted to just a reformatory.
We hope that this podcast has added to your understandings of this period and the records available about children during this time. Please use Jane's website, nis.wikidot.com, to support you in your family research into girls in reformatories before 1900. Identifying any reformatory admission can be difficult, so if you're able to identify any girls whose names did not survive to reach state archives, please contact Jane through her website or through the Newcastle Family History Society email at nfhsinc@gmail.com. We hope that you will be able to join us again for the next episode in this series, What Are You Looking At?, where Jane will discuss the letter book of Joseph Hines Clark, the second superintendent of the Newcastle Industrial School. Thank you for listening to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.